We're live. It's been a crazy day. I don't know about for you all. It's been extremely crazy for me. I've been working on the website. The website crashed and I wasn't able to upload images. So I stayed up until like 5 a.m. Got 3 hours of sleep. Still didn't get it fixed. So many issues. But Theology Thursdays 24 is taking place. I think this is going to be an interesting topic. Hopefully, we got some people online that will participate. If not, we'll participate here. So today's topic is turning the other cheek. So if I'm not going to do that. But if you smack me, see, exactly. So turning the other cheek. All right. Let's start with, as I usually do, we'll start with a scripture reference. And the scripture reference is Luke 6, verse 29. And this is Jesus speaking. It says, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. So just to give you a little bit of background, oftentimes people think this particular verse, like Jesus is doing something extremely radical. But what I found out in my studies is that there was a verse in Proverbs 24:29 that gives the insight that, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is not something that you always have to do. So Proverbs 24:29 reads, do not say I will do to others as they have done to me, / or I will pay them back for what they have done. So even in the Old Testament, we always say, well, the Old Testament says an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And Proverbs is saying, don't say that you're going to repay someone for what they did to you. So Jesus, we don't know. Jesus potentially could have been pulling from Proverbs, or Jesus probably just had his own idea about what eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth meant. Just to give you some of the context. So Luke, for those who don't know, Luke and Acts are actually one series of books. So it's like two letters. It's like two letters that were written to an individual named Theophilus. And it should be seen as one complete work, although they're separate in the Bible. Luke was written between 80 and 90 CE. The author shapes the mission of the church, and the author may also be trying to show that the Christian movement was a little bit harmless. It also shows that both Jews and Gentiles are to live out the gospel in a pluralistic environment. So that's just the background. So now we have turning the other cheek. So, and digging into like commentaries, trying to figure out what exactly this turn the other cheek thing and what it meant in the context of the society in which Jesus spoke. It basically talked about when you turn the other cheek, it's like, well, let me just read it verbatim. It says, shame your enemy by your superior goodness, and it's deflect hostility or prevent further abuse by offering no resistance, rise above pettiness, or demonstrate Christ-like character as a Christian witness. Another thing with turning the other cheek, it says striking a person on the cheek was a form of insult, a expression of cursing or revealing. Turning the other cheek is an equally dramatic physical form of non-retaliation that breaks the cycle of violence and rejects the principle of retaliation. So basically what it's saying is it kind of takes the power away from the well, apparently in that time, it takes the power away from the individual. So it's like, well, you slap me once and I turn the other cheek and you slap me again. It's like you don't have no power over me type of thing, which for me is maybe it's a little bit of a stretch. Unless you guys are cool with, the idea of just getting smacked around and I'm going to offer the other cheek. But we'll discuss that in a second. Actually, let's just hop into it now. Do you think Jesus is calling us to turn the other cheek in every single situation?
Define turning the other cheek again for me, please.
Okay. I need that back. So basically, it's a form of nonviolent resistance. So, like when you actually define, are you talking about in the context of when Jesus was talking, or just in general? So in the context.
Well, yeah, I guess you can mesh that. Either way.
So basically, if somebody strikes you, and you offer them the other cheek. Okay, let's take the second part of that verse where it says, "Give your garment and give your pants," or whatever, right? So the idea in this particular society was, since they wore tunics and stuff like that and only had a two-piece garment, if somebody takes your top piece, you give them the bottom, and as a result, you're kind of embarrassing them, or you kind of place it back on them. So it's like a deflection thing. So it's similar to like a nonviolent resistant movement, to where you would show that you're not going to respond, but the people around you, or if there are people around you witnessing this action, they end up turning on the individual or pointing out the individual, like, how could you do this to the individual like twice, like a double, a double smack or whatever.
So we're not saying that it's always a physical smacking or violent thing.
No.
Is it like when you ask, should we always turn the other cheek?
Yeah.
You're not asking necessarily like for physical things, or are you?
It depends. Jesus didn't clarify.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Jesus spoke in parables, so
Yeah.
some people may read this as an actual physical attack, but it could be both. So, that answers your question. What do you all think? Is Jesus calling us to turn the cheek in every single situation?
I think Jesus is calling us to not return hatred with hatred, or disrespect with disrespect. But I don't think Jesus is calling us to be pacifists.
Yeah, that's the word. Why not when Jesus got crucified? And then retaliate. And when Peter cut the ear off of the centurion, Jesus put it back and said, "You shouldn't be doing that."
Yeah, he didn't, because Jesus could have then fought the centurion, and he chose to do the opposite. But the crucifixion, I think, like that just had to happen. Right?
Yeah.
It was fulfilling.
So
but you said that Jesus isn't necessarily calling us to be pacifists. And so he was asking you, what makes you think that, if Jesus, based on what Jesus did?
I just don't think we're supposed to just sit around and be amused and just take everything, I think that we are able to have responses and have feelings and thoughts and all of that. We have reflexes.
Yes.
My reflexes, if you punch me in the face, well, I can't guarantee what's going to happen, but I'm working on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't think that means we should just take everything and just be like, okay.
That's a valid opinion.
I don't know. I think it depends. Well, I don't know if I think it depends, because I feel like a lot of what Jesus did was very intentional and very purposeful. So if someone were to do something to me and my response is just a reflex, that's not very intentional or very purposeful. It's reactive.
Yes.
Versus if, like, when you talked about what the scripture says, if someone takes your cloak, give them your shirt too. Well, that can be very intentional in saying, look, you have my cloak, here's also my shirt, you have nothing left to take, now look at you, like, what are you doing? And so in doing that, I can see how it's like kind of, I don't know if that's necessarily like shaming the other person, but it's putting that person in a position to say, what you've done, it was for no reason, it amounted to nothing. You have, I can still stand here and be right here despite what you did. So if I look at it in that way, then I could see that Jesus might want us to be very intentional and purposeful about how we respond and the interactions we have and all that with other people in certain situations.
One thing that comes up for me as we talk about this is Jesus tends to ask the disciples to do things that are extremely radical. So when they ask about forgiveness, he's like, forgive. It was like 7 times 7 times 7 or something like that. I think the total ended up being like 144 or something like that, which makes it seem like there's a limit on forgiveness. But back in that time, whether it's 30, CE or whatever it was, that would have been seen like a number like 144, 200, or whatever it was, would have been seen like infinity, right? So Jesus is asking the disciples to forgive all the time. I don't know if we necessarily could actually, I don't even think that's logical that we would be so forgiving or not retaliate, because then I think if we were that perfect, there's no need for grace when we make some mistakes and anything like that, because we wouldn't make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, it's like, do this. But even something I was reading in the commentary was saying that even with people would have took this particular verse as being like yeah, right type of thing, like not necessarily laugh at Jesus, but it would have been humorous to say, all right, well, no matter what happens, I'm not going to respond. But I think it was like a double play on humor and a double play on like a serious goal that we should actually aim to achieve. And remember, he's doing this before he gets stabbed. He's saying this before he gets stabbed in the side, before he gets crucified, before he gets flogged.
But there
And
was a response, though.
Huh?
In saying, give them my shirt, too, that is a response.
No, I'm talking about an eye for eye type of response. Like
okay, but
like
no,
but
response. Right, I got you. Okay, a violent
so like
response,
a violent
but it's
response.
still, yeah.
Okay.
James Everett says, I think he calls us to turn the other cheek in all situations, but also to address the situation.
Excellent point. To turn the other cheek, but then also to address the situation. We're gonna talk about that. That's a good point. I made that point at the end, so just remind me, because I wanted to say something about that too. So let's see. We talked about, does Jesus call us to turn the other cheek in every situation? So can you turn the other cheek, or can you turn the other cheek always, or does it depend on the situation?
I think it depends, but I think that's just because we're human.
Yeah.
And because, whatever we bring to the situation, like if I know that a person who I'm dealing with annoys me, then it might be harder for me to turn the other cheek toward them. But in general, it's possible. But it's just, they get on my nerves. Oh gosh, they're at it again. If I go in that mode, then I can make it tougher for myself to turn the other cheek.
No, but okay, so real life. Let's take off the pass the cloth and the I don't have a pass the cloth next time.
That's my response.
I'm saying for me, it's real response.
Yeah.
If somebody if I'm witnessing you, let's just say an act of violence against you, the person's not gonna have to worry about you turning the other cheek, because I might have to do something to their cheek. I'm just gonna be real. Who's called? Is that God calling on Theology Thursday? Maybe that's Jesus letting us know.
You could have just ignored it.
We heard it. So I think for me, I'm not even gonna lie, it is conditional. So if I feel like family's in danger, or there's physical harm or threats, I think this may be conditional for me. I'm just gonna be honest.
I mean, it depends, but for a lot of us, it's not physical; it's emotional.
That too, yeah.
Yeah, mainly it's emotional for so many of us.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think because of the relationships or the interactions that we have with certain people, whether they be family members or friends, co-workers, whatever, it can make it tough. But it's not. It's still not impossible, because I think, if Jesus is saying for us to do this, does Jesus say that we have to do it perfectly each time? No.
Yeah.
Because Jesus was teaching his disciples. So there's going to be a lesson, a period of learning, like all that. And that learning can be lifelong.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's actually a good point. I agree. Yes. All right. So the next point I wanted to talk about, the next question is, Like, what do you think the problems are with turning the other cheek? Do you think there are anything associated, any risk factors as it relates to turning the other cheek?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Speak about it.
Speak on it. That the person who you're turning the other cheek against, or however I'm trying to say that they may not understand the purpose behind what you're doing.
Yeah.
So for them, it could be like, whatever, you're a sucker.
Yeah. So it ultimately may not matter. Yeah.
Right. So they're not shamed in any way. They try to shame you back, or they don't learn from what you're doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wheels turn. Do you have anything over there, Jim? Okay. So, all right. Some of the things I was thinking about, because this particular lesson was problematic for me, just because of everything that goes on in society, whether it's the terrorist attacks in France, whether it's police brutality, whether it's just so much violence and craziness going on. Physical stuff. That of course there's the emotional stuff going on, but online with social media we see all this stuff. I see so much craziness on my timeline. Sometimes I have to shut it down. You see fights. You see. I'm not even going to call the website that promotes the ignorance, so you're not getting fame on the open box. But just a lot of the craziness that goes on online, and so this is some of the problems I see with turning the other cheek. It's not necessarily problems for us, but one of the things is society as a whole doesn't buy into this concept, right? So you have a small set of individuals who may not be pacifists, but may be, practicing some form of non-violent resistance or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, if the person doesn't care or doesn't know what you're doing, and if there's no societal, activity around the individual either being shamed, corrected, or their ideas or attitudes being adjusted, they could just carry on and do whatever they want at any given time, right? Mm-hmm. So, but here's another thing, and oh man, there's so much church history stuff I wish I could get into right now. So I will touch on the spread of Christianity. What I found is in church history we talk about, oftentimes the spread of Christianity is associated with some sort of war. So for those people who don't know, you have Constantine, who basically made, once he took over Rome, it was acceptable to be a Christian. He made pretty much Christianity the state religion. And let's see what other notes I have. He ordered the end of Christian persecution around 313 CE, right? So, but the thing that's crazy about this is when he was going to war, he had a vision or a dream that he thought was from Jesus and God. So as he was going to war, he told the soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields. So even the concept of, well, and you can kind of refer to this in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament a little bit, but the concept of, I'm going to war and we're going to win because of Jesus, but Jesus says turn the other cheek, love your enemy. I mean, love your neighbor as yourself, and all this stuff about loving your enemies. But then you push Christianity by going to war and then using the Christian symbols to say God is on our side. So the idea of turning the other,
people are still using Christianity to do crazy things.
Yeah. So this concept of turning the other cheek is not necessarily lived out when we want to spread our religion, because when we spread our religion, it's violent. It's arguments, whether it's emotional or physical. Even if you look at, like I said, I'm not going to get into all the church history. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. But even if you get into the Reformation, when the Reformation happened, Protestants versus Catholics, there was so many Protestants that were wiped out. In church, we don't talk about church history, but that's just how, it happened. So I find it to be problematic to turn the other cheek, not because it's necessarily hard, but society's like, forget that. Turning the other cheek is not cool. And also, where did I put it at? There was another point I wanted to make. Maybe it's later on. So society doesn't buy into it. And did I delete the point? All right, so I don't remember what the point is, but you get it. Christianity is often spread through the use of violence, so it wipes out what Jesus said, or it just makes it seem kind of insignificant. Do I want to ask this question now, or do I ask this question? Yeah, go ahead.
With turning the other cheek, you can invite more abuse or harassment from that person.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right, this is so for people like me who were born in the late '70s or whatever, and didn't get to experience nonviolent movements. You get to see it on TV in black and white with MLK and stuff like that. I don't necessarily know how this works because even as a kid, you're kind of told sometimes, if somebody hits you, hit them back, right? So the concept of saying we're gonna have a nonviolent movement, and if these people who are racist, if they hit us, you don't respond back, and then actually having to be trained on that stuff, that it seems so foreign nowadays. But I do know it works because when they were having the thing with Mike Brown out here, and they were protesting in D.C. You'll see the non-resistant movement working in a sense that people were just laying out in the streets, shutting down traffic, and then you get the government to kind of move a little bit. I'm not necessarily sure what came out of all of that. But, I mean, even for that moment, it lets people in power know that, they have our attention and we're at least ready to organize or be a little bit disruptive.
The interesting thing about that point that the commenter made about you can invite, more negative to you is, wouldn't that really depend on how the type of relationship you have with that person? Well, I mean, I think it just depends on the type of relationship you have with the person who you're supposed to be turning the other cheek from. Because if whatever way I'm in relationship with you, if I alter that relationship, then that means that I can potentially alter how and what you can supposedly do to me from that point on. So, like, if you did something to me that shamed me, harmed me, hurt me in some way, if I alter things a little bit, you might not be able to do that again, even if I turn the other cheek.
Oh, yeah. I see what you're saying. Making adjustments.
Yeah, that's what it makes me wonder. Because I know a lot of times we'll think, like, just like if we're talking about forgiveness, which we're not talking about, a lot of times people think you have to be back in a relationship in the same way with that person.
Yeah.
And you don't. But, so it just kind of made me think about that.
I want to put a stake in the ground right now. We don't have special effects. Anybody in abusive relationships turning the other cheek is not it's not saying that you should stay in an abusive relationship. I want to make that absolutely clear right now. If you're in an abusive relationship, by all means, this discussion is not promoting that you stay in that relationship and turn the other cheek. Which is not addressed in scripture at all, really. But we can have that discussion another time. But I just wanted to make that clear. I'm not advocating for that at all. So to push the discussion about, I guess, so we kind of talked about this a little bit. We talked about turning the other cheek. So I mentioned where I witnessed it working. Have you all witnessed nonviolence or turning the other cheek, whether it's emotional or physical, actually working at all?
Girl that's in your class, like your best.
I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by working. Because if you just said back in the civil rights when they did stuff, that worked. I mean, God, that was really hard to look at. I can only imagine what it was like to experience that. But if you're talking about currently, it working will depend on the person who's turning the other cheek. Like if I were turning the other cheek and you said, is it working? That would depend on how I define it or how I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, so let's make this scalable because I think we've been talking about this in general. So I remember for me, I used to fight a lot from first to fifth grade until my fifth grade teacher, Miss Sale, I'm not sure if you're watching her, maybe. Hi, anyway. Until she let me know, if you continue to fight down this path. So I felt invincible at that point. So she would tell me, what are you going to do?
6 years old, invincible.
No, fifth grade is 11.
You said first through fifth.
First. I didn't fight that much, but when I got into, I wasn't scared to fight. So Sailor was like, well, what's gonna happen if you fight somebody that has a knife or a gun or something like that? So then it reeled back like my thought process of being invincible, right? So after that, I may have had like one fight, which was insane. But I think about I'm just laughing because it was a funny fight. I'm just thinking about how I avoided potential arguments, and sometimes you have to walk away. Sometimes you have to risk embarrassment, which is in a sense kind of turning the other cheek. Not to say that I got hit, but people were trying to provoke situations. Sometimes you just have to be like, you know what, it's not worth it, and it ultimately diffuses the situation and everything that's going on. Right?
Yeah.
You guys did it. Well, it's a lot, for those who know, there's a lot going on around here. We always find ourselves in an interesting situation that way. Yes, so that's how I seen it work personally. So when I said a scale, it looked like, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you had to see it work a certain way in society as a whole, but even personally, do you have any personal experiences of how this concept may have worked?
I think so. Just different encounters with people in different situations. I don't have a specific example because I just kind of seen it and how I've seen people relate to one another based on certain situations happening.
Yeah.
And what that has done, or for that, at least that one person. Sometimes it's for both, but for that one person. And I've attempted to do it in some ways.
I think even in the context of relationships, like romantic relationships, there has to be a level of passive resistance or whatever you want to call it, because ultimately when you're in close quarters with someone, regardless of how much you love them, you're going to get into arguments. But so, not to give any personal examples, but I remember we did.
Not to give any personal ones.
I'm not.
But
I'm not.
Right.
I'm not gonna give any personal examples. But I do remember reading Deep October's book, 7 Spiritual Rules for Success. Right?
The one that I read?
Yeah, the small one.
7 Spiritual Laws.
Laws for Success. Yeah, okay.
For success.
And one of the laws is the law of least resistance. Right?
Yeah.
That it talks about just being kind of fluid so you don't let stuff impact you and you don't necessarily respond. So even in the context of relationships, I think one of the things we have to learn.
What's the name of the book? Sorry.
What?
I didn't know that was the name of the book. I thought it was 7 Spiritual Laws, but it was of success. Hey, all right now.
I'll see it. I'll put it on the shelf. So I think in the context of relationships, we kind of have to learn this concept because ultimately it will help strengthen our relationships. We don't have to argue about everything. But, our people who are in our close quarters know how to, even if it's not purposeful, they know how to push our buttons and they, because we have so much more invested, the arguments tend to be more intense.
Hi.
She wants to join us.
Got a little person over here.
So yeah, I think we have to learn some of this concept, even if it's not perfect, to help strengthen our relationships, whether it's romantic, whether it's family, and then
friendships
it's like friendships too. And then also it's not to say that your resistance has to be in somebody's face. So you could resist from a distance. Like, you know what? The situation is a little bit crazy. I may not engage this person until I'm ready to kind of address the situation mentally. And then if it gets a little bit too tough, I have to pull back. So the resistance doesn't have to be civil rights resistance where you're there on the front lines. It could be from a distance, like, all right, I'm just not going to engage this person. That's if it's a family member that you don't live with.
I just thought of an example. Has you ever seen situations, or sometimes it's on TV a lot, but just even if with celebrities or in person, where somebody has like a secret or something major that happened to them and somebody else knows, and so they want to spread it or they want to tell somebody about it, but that person tells that thing themselves instead of having this other person tell it to embarrass them or to spill their secrets or anything like that. I feel like that's kind of a modern day way that we've seen it too. Where it's like, I'm gonna tell my own story, and that way, now what? You have nothing else to say about me. You have nothing that you can hold against me. Look at you.
Like 8 Mile. Eminem, so he was battle rapping, and they would talk about him being in his trailer park. So what happens in 8 Mile is he turns the situation around, and he starts rapping. A-Ball is older.
I know.
He starts rapping about himself, and the guy rapping against him doesn't have anything to say, so he takes all his power back and he destroys the guy in the battle.
Right. Right.
Nah,
Great example.
I got my help. That's what they call getting your help. I got my help. My help.
Eminem, who never mind. Anyway.
The law works, yes. All right. So I wanted to give one concept before I ask these questions. I have one difficult question that is kind of a doozy. It just came to me. I was like, whoa, this is kind of crazy. So another movement that worked outside of the civil rights movement is called the Power People Revolution, and it happened in the Philippines in 1986, right? So Ferdinand Marcos, I read this even about this incident saying he was president, right? This guy, they're gonna lose, right? He knows he's gonna lose because people are kind of upset where the economy's going. He declares martial law, and so he gets the military to go out. You can't vote. They start confiscating businesses and stuff like that. So the army's on his side. He declares martial law on the Philippines, right? Resulting in close to 20-year presidency. So from 71 or whatever to like 1982 or 3, he was president. So he was sucking the country dry and all this stuff like that. The crazy thing about this is the United States supported him in the background because anti-communist, right? So what happens is, what happens is, to further the story, one individual, Nino Aquino, who may have not been his friends. I've read different things. They were kind of pushing him to be the next president. He ends up leaving the Philippines because he has heart issues, and when he comes back, he gets assassinated or killed. So they don't know if Marcos had ties to it or not. Some people were saying that's conspiracy. Some people saying it wasn't. So we don't necessarily know. But what happens is, when they're about to start the revolution, the army splits, and one army is, I guess, about to kind of, go against Marcos, but they don't do anything. And what happens is it rallies like a whole bunch of people that go to this place that it's called ESDA, and ultimately 2.3 million people demonstrate in this area, right? So, which is only 2% of the Philippine population, which is kind of crazy. As a result of all those people out there, Marcos doesn't attack, and ultimately he steps down as president, and then the guy who got assassinated, Aquino, his wife ends up becoming president. So they try to have like snap elections in between, but then they were saying he cheated and all this stuff like that. But just as a result of so many people being out there and him deciding, you know what, we can't attack these people, he was like, all right, I'm gonna leave. So that's just another nonviolent movement that happened that I researched. It's called the Power People Movement. You guys can look it up. Some other interesting, crazy stuff that's associated with that too. So if any of my Filipino friends are watching, you probably know about it. So that's just another non-violent movement outside of the one we think about often, which is civil rights. Here is to address what James said. And this is just my problem. The problem with non-violent or passive movements is oftentimes there's no follow-up. So when we see this stuff with Mike Brown and police brutality, we do all this marching and protesting. We see it in Baltimore, but then we don't necessarily ask for anything, or we don't know what we're asking for. And then once the emotion fizzles, hey, how you doing? Once the emotion fizzles out, then things seem like they go back to normal. And even in the Philippines, they were saying that what happens is ultimately the economy didn't get much better, so they're like still struggling there because there's still power dynamics there that they weren't able to address. Right. So to address what James said, like, so you have these nonviolent movements, they're great, but unless they're strategic, unless you're planned and you know what you're asking for based on these movements, it can just kind of fizzle out, and you can only get a little bit of success in that particular moment. Right, so there's that. Still try to. This is a question. This is a question. Do I want to ask him now? We got time. We got time. I'll ask him. Nonviolent movement. Jesus says to love your neighbors, love your enemies, pray for your enemies. Right. What came to me as I'm doing these studies, because I have a ton of questions when I attack texts like this, is: does God model this behavior towards Satan? Is God forgiving of Satan? And will God be forgiving of sin? You don't have to have an answer for that, but that's just what popped up in my head. Does God turn the other cheek towards Satan? Do we just want to let that
Let it marinate.
let it marinate? We may not have an answer because Revelation talks about war and at the end Satan be defeated and all that stuff like that. But then we also have to realize that that was written by an individual who lived in a cave. John lived in a cave.
Do you want?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have an answer.
Okay.
I just had a question. If you were to look at the book of Job, where Satan was able to do certain things with Job with God's permission, then
Joe's like, no, don't do it.
No, that's what I
no, then
Joe was with my father.
Yeah.
right. So then, if you say, does God model this behavior towards Satan?
Mhm.
But if Satan's behavior is perceived as bad, but in the case of Job, Satan was given permission to do it, what would God have against Satan?
Yeah. And that's
Except that Satan is doing what Satan was permitted to do.
And this is why I struggled with this study, because once that question came up for me, and I was like, this throws a whirlwind for everything. There's no answer to this question. I mean, we don't know. We could just, if we want to read the Bible literally, we could just assume that, when the Great War comes at the end, Satan's going to be defeated. That's it. Or the dragon or whatever it is.
But that doesn't mean that God is or is not turning the other cheek. That could very well mean that there was a predestined plan and that will be fulfilled, just like Jesus being on the cross.
Yep. And that's what people who usually go to war say. That we have predestined, we were supposed to have this land is ours. Give me it.
I'm only talking about what it says in the Bible. I don't know what you're talking about with the land. You're talking about from the Israelites?
No, but people using biblical texts to justify war.
Right.
Violence.
Right. I don't know how they do that, but okay. No, I don't know. Yeah.
So that's what comes up for me is in the end times when this stuff is all said and done, is Satan forgiven? I'm not sure.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Which may be problematic for some individuals watching, but just a question. So there's that. We talked about the people, the Power People Revolution, and all right, some final thoughts. Unless you all have any other thing. Yeah, I didn't throw you guys for a loop.
No.
Okay. So
I think I had a pretty good response to it. You know what I'm saying?
So, also in doing this research, I came across this book called "The Kingdom of God is Within You." It's by Leo Tolstoy. Yeah, do you know?
I haven't heard that book, but heard of Tolstoy.
Oh yeah, this book was written in or at least translated to English in 1880s, right? So he talks about nonviolence, turning the other cheek. I didn't get through the whole book. The audio book's 13 hours, so I think I got through the first quarter of the book. But he was saying some pretty interesting things as it relates to Christianity and his thoughts about turning the other cheek. So he goes, one of the things, this is a paraphrase, he goes, guns, war, and any retaliation is against the will of Jesus and God, including military recruitment. So if you're recruiting for wars, you're already kind of setting up to attack and be aggressive. Mm-hmm. He also says, and now cheek for cheek goes against our beliefs as Christians. This is just his concept of what Jesus said. He also says, one of the questions that comes up is, why can the government kill with no consequences, but if I kill somebody individually, I'm prosecuted or I have to go to jail? So when the government decides to go to war, they're free to go to war just because, but no one really holds them accountable.
Right. Well, those other countries do. That's why we still have some stuff that we've had.
That's okay. So that's a point. with that, one of the things I want to say, we do have some time, and so I was doing a little research on Islam to figure out what Islam says about retaliation and all this stuff like that. So the way the articles I came against, and some of the things I read as it relates to Quran is that Islam is not necessarily, they're not supposed to be initiators because they have verses in the Quran that speak out against initiating. But ultimately, their thing is it's more of a retaliation type of thing. And as it relates to, it was a little bit confusing because some instances in the Quran seem like it's okay to kind of go at Christians, but then somebody who was actually doing a commentary on it was like, well, no, that was only if Christians attacked them and did submit to the will of God and stuff like that. So depending on who's looking at certain texts, it's subjective, and I can see, I don't condone it, but I can see why radical, people who consider themselves Muslim kind of go at us or go out the world because they feel that they're under attack. So they think they can use their text to be justified, right? So, but here's the thing about that. So you have a religion that is retaliating, but then you have Christians who are not supposed to strike back. But because we strike back or we do stuff like whether or not it's set up military bases and where people consider holy land and stuff like that, it automatically causes tension and causes clashing because we're not doing what Tolstoy is saying by being radical enough not to retaliate, not to coup military. But it's this weird cycle because we have to protect ourselves, otherwise we risk destruction. So it's this weird cycle. So like to try to wrap my head around this, it's tough because if society is not on a peace movement, some people are gonna have to take the weight and say, you know what, we want world peace, and ultimately when that happens, some people get hurt. Just like in a lot of non-resistant movements. Another point he makes is it is noble to die in non-resisting love. And I added this on the side because what I realize is that society says it's more noble to die in self-defense. So when you die for America, it's noble. When if I was to step in front of a bullet for Brooke, it's noble. But it's not necessarily. I think society says it's more noble to die in self-defense as it is, non-resistance. I think there's a little bit of nobility for non-resistance, but if I was to push a child out of the way, if somebody was gonna, attack a child or something like that, I kind of stepped in and fight, and then I died that way. I think it kind of becomes like equal in a sense. And the last point he makes, as it relates to where I got to the book, he says if you're really gonna follow the path of Christ, you should refuse to be in any armed forces, which again is a radical concept. But you have to figure out if you're called to be a radical Christian and be a pacifist or not. And I'm not sure. Society makes it tough. The way the world is kind of constructed makes it tough.
There have been people who've done it though.
Yeah.
So after all that, where are you, man? Can you turn the other cheek or not?
I'm gonna do like you said. You aim. So the idea is not to be like, you know what? I've got this study. I see all this stuff like that. Bam! I'm gonna be a martyr. I'm gonna go out on the front lines. If you do anything, I'm just gonna take it like Jesus did. No. I think the idea is to work towards the concept of turning the other cheek, while also trying to spread and teach and let individuals know why it works, how it should work, and then maybe if you can impact society little by little or influence your circle little by little, then if the world's not going to be peaceful while I'm here, at least my circle and my situation and the people I impact can have peace. Mm-hmm. So will I say, because of the study I did, will I be able to change the world? Maybe, maybe not. Will I be able to impact our relationships here? Probably.
So you might not change the world, but you might change your world.
Exactly. And that's where it starts. Was that corny?
I like my own Hallmark card.
So that's all I have. We're coming short on time right now. Facebook users. So the reason I cut off at 45 minutes is for people who are watching on Facebook. I like to upload the videos. Facebook gets a 45-minute time limit. But if you join us live, you can continue the discussion. So you should come out to Wegmans for those of you who are in Maryland. What do we have coming up?
Or DC or
Or DC or